and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and I have with me here today Raffi. Raffi's been playing music for kids for, well, almost 25 years, and a lot of stories there. He's pulled many of those stories together in an autobiography, and we're going to talk about his life today. How you doing?
All right, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. I'm going to start at the beginning. You were born in Egypt of Armenian parents. And I'm sure you don't remember all that much from the first year of your life, but paint me some pictures of early days of you as a little kid.
I once peed on my dad's record collection.
Big trouble.
I think I must have been 2 and a bit at the time.
Could you still play those records?
It was in the living room, and it was under the it was under a table, and I got into heck for that.
So that obviously shaped an early part of your life.
I also used to play marbles with my brother. We had Persian carpets with patterns that were perfect for playing marbles. So I remember that. I remember visits to the pyramids. Most Sundays my dad used to like to get us all in a car, and we'd go to a supper club, a dinner club, I guess. And we'd play in the sand. And sometimes and this club was just down the road from the pyramids. It was Café Vue des Pyramides. And if we were lucky, Dad used to drive us up the road. He wasn't always able to do that, but some Sundays we'd get to drive up the road. There they were, these towering pyramids.
In all their splendor. Your father was a photographer.
Yes, he was a world-renowned portrait photographer. He went by the name Kavuk. And Kavuk portraits for 3 generations. It's been quite a legacy since my grandfather started that work in black and white in the 1920s in Cairo. Dad, in the 50s, turned his attention to color portraiture. That really intrigued him. So he was one of the pioneers of color portraiture in the world. And his skill and his art was so great in that medium that it gained the family entry into Canada when we emigrated in 1958.
So that's an important part of the story of how you came here.
Yes.
What about your mother? What was she like?
Lucy was a storyteller, and she was dramatic and flamboyant, larger than life. She was one of a kind.
And what is the story of how you arrived at Canada? It's a very interesting background to your parents having come from Armenia to Egypt and then Canada, which seems very far away.
Well, let me go back just a little bit then to my grandparents, because much of ancient Armenia was within Turkish borders at the turn of the century. International geopolitics had brought that about. And the difficulty was that the Turks were being very, very cruel to the Armenian population within its borders. And during the First World War, more than 1 million Armenians were massacred by the Turks, wiped out, deportation, exile, and death. And the international community did not come to the aid of the Armenians. The reason I mention this is that my father was 1 month old when his father, my paternal grandfather, through the skill of his art, the family escaped a certain death. And what happened was that Grandpa was able to obtain a small photograph of the commanding officer in charge. Right. And by candlelight, with my grandma at his side, huddled in this damp cavern, made a very impressive enlargement. He drew an enlargement from this portrait that was so impressive that our family, along with 20 others claiming to be relatives, were exempted from the line of the terrible fate. And my grandfather was instituted as art director in the region's schools. So that's how art saved the day there.
Yes.
Right? And on my mother's side, she tells the story too, and I include all this in the book. Through their own words, actually, through my mother's words and my grandfather's words. She tells of their escape as well. Her mother's first husband was hanged, and so her mother remarried. And 7 times my grandfather Asadur, my maternal grandfather, 7 times he was sentenced to death, but he was let go each time because it was learned that he was a building foreman. He could be of use, so he used to say, Lucy, that's my mother, learn something that could be of value to you.
Do you carry any of the sadness of that tragedy and that exile of Armenian people around with you personally today?
That's a good question. I'd heard these stories over and over again during my childhood about how the family escaped and so on. But I'll tell you something, Leslie. After my parents passed away 3 years ago, both of them on the same day within 12 hours of each other, of different causes, I went back, in the writing of this book and relived the telling of these stories and had to once again make sense of what it is that I'd heard. And I think I finally got it in my 50th year. I just turned 50, that I was the son of Holocaust descendants.
Yes.
I had never quite got that. And my mother would say, it wasn't just the Jews that had this terrible Holocaust happen to them. The Armenians had it first in 1915. Right. And even Hitler in 1939 was quoted as saying, "Who remembers the Armenians?" So I think the answer to your question is there is a gaping hole in the Armenian community worldwide and in Armenia for some acknowledgement, because there isn't even an acknowledgement, from the Turkish authorities of what took place. And if there were, of course, then the reconciliation could begin. And I suppose Armenians of my age and my generation, we carry it in some way, yes.
Sure.
And certainly through our parents and through the stories. Yeah.
And that's really interesting to hear from the happy-go-lucky Canadian children's singer, to hear the depth of that story. You came to Canada with your parents, and again it was because of your father's fame and success as a photographer, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. He was working, as I said, in color, and very few people were doing that then. Yusuf Karsh, the other Armenian noted photographer, Ottawa-based, was not working in color. So my dad came here and established the studio with my mother's help. My brother also had to leave school and help in what was very much a family business. But there was early success that greeted us through a network of angels that apparently had just been waiting to help us on our way. And my parents were so grateful to people like Lieutenant Governor Keeler Mackay of Ontario. This is 1958. And the Mackays introduced our family to the Mitchners. The Mitchners became governors general, and so one thing led to another. But it was astonishing, the success that my dad had with his color portraiture, and it became world-renowned. And when my dad took the Queen Mother's portrait in 1965, the Ottawa Citizen, for example, ran a full-color, shot of it, and that was rare in the late 60s to run something full-color in a newspaper. And many of the prime ministers of Canada, Kavuk's portraits were their official portraits. So it's something that the family was quite proud of. And as I say, my brother Onig, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but he's the third generation Kavuk, and he's still taking these masterful Kavuk portraits in Toronto.
Okay, so visual art stays there through your family, but you
Very
become
much.
a performer. And when you start out, you weren't playing music for kids at all, were you?
No, I was wanting to be another James Taylor or Bruce Cockburn. I was
Why not?
doing my folk songs, and hitting the coffee house trail. I had a backpack on my back and hitchhiked across Canada, 1970, 71, I think it was. And
What was that like, hitchhiking across Canada? Do you remember standing at some...
I remember standing outside of Wawa with my thumb out, waiting for that next car,
Paying your dues. And it arrived, didn't it?
And it did. It took me further on down the highway.
All you had to do was believe.
And, occasionally I took the train and the bus, and I remember being in Calgary and having no money because my gig in Saskatoon fell through, and I got my one and only welfare check ever in Calgary, and it was for $10 just so I could get something to eat. But, I used to busk on the streets of Banff, and in Vancouver I was busking.
You got to pay your dues, man.
I was paying, you know what I was doing? Let's see, I was selling the Georgia Strait in Vancouver to make some money for food.
So then how did it begin to click with children's performing and playing music for kids?
Well, by 1974, by that time, my former wife and I were living together, Deb, and she was a kindergarten teacher, and her mother was a nursery school teacher, and of course, I do tell these stories in the book, that, you know, the way I was asked to come into the classroom and sing for the kids. And also the Mariposa Folk Festival had a program that brought in folk singers to sing for kids. And that's how I got started.
Did you learn from that audience? Did they teach you how to be the performer that you needed to be?
That's a good question. I think by circumstance they did, but it was more Deb and her mother, Daphne, and our friends Bonnie and Bert Simpson, who were primary school teachers, who taught me all about kids and what kind of people they are. I mean, I'd go out and have an experience with children, and something would happen. Like, I'll give you an example. I'd say, "So, shall we sing one more song?" And a 3-year-old goes, "No!"
A brutally honest audience.
Yeah. So I would take that experience home, and Deb would explain to me that the child didn't mean anything personal. It's just that they're very candid and spontaneous. And so I learned with, you know, sharing these stories, I learned about how the child is. And I came to love and accept the child, and accept however that child is in the moment, because that's the key to working with children.
And how does that change your perception as an adult? One of the hardest things for any adult is to keep going back to find the best core essence of yourself as a child.
Right.
Does that work for you?
Well, I think it's vitally important that we understand that children live in their own emotional world. And unless we see things from their perspective, we may not understand how they're reacting at any given time. We may think, oh, they ought to just do such and such, and that's from our adult perspective. But when we take the time to think about how it must feel for them in the moment, things start to make sense.
Yes.
A 3-year-old once called out after one of my concerts. I was walking back on stage for an encore. I was in California. And this young child called out, "Why is he coming back?" And everybody could hear. So the whole place erupts in laughter.
Yeah.
But I didn't laugh. I knew that was a really intelligent question for that child. Because he didn't know. And I said to the audience, just a moment, maybe this is the child's first ever concert. And after all, I had said that the previous song was my last song. People had applauded. I waved goodbye and walked off. Had I not told the truth?
Yeah.
And here I was coming back to sing
That's
again.
right.
So I took a moment to address the child and explain to him what an encore was. And then we moved on. Very important moments.
Yeah, I guess you do. You learn from that kind of stuff. And the learning process of being a performer and having a career, does the career ever take over your life? I guess that's a ridiculous question. Of course it does. How do you get your life back, maybe is the flip side of that question, after the career has?
Well, yeah, it does take over your life, but you know, if you're conscious of your growth processes, you try not to move too fast. I mean, I was always saying, both to myself and to Deb and the people who worked at Troubadour in Toronto before we moved out west, before the operation moved out west in 1990, I was saying, you know, I don't want us to do what's expected of us by the Madison Avenue types. You know, let's grow at a pace that we can all understand and process.
Yeah.
Puts you through a lot of changes when you're suddenly selling hundreds of thousands of albums. And, you know, a couple of years before that, you didn't think of yourself as a success. Well, a lot of growth work there going on. Yeah.
My guest today is Raffi, and I'm going to take a short break, and we're going to come back and talk about Raffi and Raffi's life right after this.
This series is brought to you as a public service by Mount St. Vincent University.
Welcome back to Off the Page. My guest is Raffi. I notice in your book that you've been influenced by the practice of yoga, both personally and as a performer. Tell me about that. How does that work into your life?
I was studying yoga, taking yoga classes in Toronto in the mid-'70s, and I did for about 7 years. And I still do my stretching most days today, take about 20, 25 minutes to do it. The sun exercises and a few other things. This is Hatha yoga. And I do a little bit of meditation from time to time. I did a fair amount of it back in the late 70s. And I think it was a spiritual quest for me. Yoga was probably where I first got a sense of the interconnectedness of all life. And yeah, it's been a blessing in my life.
Much of your book is about this quest for any number of things. But the inner journeys.
A number of quests. Huh?
Yeah. That. What is it that you're looking for?
Now, or what is it that I was looking for?
Well, why don't you give me A and B?
Well, I was looking for identity. I mean, all my life I've had a struggle for identity. Who am I? Whose child am I? Because there's, you know that, you have your biological parents, but you also know that there's a greater world. And because my parents' voices were so loud in my interiors, because they were both very strict parents, very loving but very strict, it took me a long time to find out who I was and what my voice was. Unfortunately, I used to experience my sense of self as something that was missing rather than what was there.
Yes.
And it took a great deal of therapy, luckily with a very gifted counselor, to get a sense of that there was someone home here who was lovable and wonderful. But you can't just do that in your head. You've got to do your emotional work and cry your tears and feel your pain to integrate what you think you're learning about yourself.
And what about now? Where's that search at this point in your life?
Well, it's a whole lot different. I mean, it's an ongoing, it's one's search for who one is an ongoing process. But by now, I feel a tremendous connection to all of life. My feet are rooted in the earth and my head is in the cosmos. I mean, I am a child of the universe.
Now, when you say that, of
and
course,
feel absolutely wonderful in that kin relation.
that sounds very abstract to me and kind of high-minded, and I want you to explain to me exactly what that means. I can hear you saying it, and I think people watching might say, yeah, that sounds really great, but what the heck does he mean by that?
I'm talking about feeling joy in every day.
Mm-hmm.
You should have seen the moon last night as we were landing from Ottawa. I checked out the moon in the window. I don't miss the little things that are glorious and beautiful. I make time for joy in every day. It's absolutely essential for me. I don't postpone my joy anymore.
How'd you learn to do that? That sounds like one of those things that's extremely difficult for most of us to do.
Well, it's a sense that, well, I don't know if it's this society and its linear look at things, but we always kind of think, well, once I do such and such and have that in place, it's going to be great. Well, frankly, tomorrow is going to feel a lot like this. This moment is all we have. And sure, we can do planning and all that kind of stuff, but the living of those plans has to be done in the now. And I'm certainly aware of that. So, and if I can just add this, I guess a practical manifestation of the spirit that I'm talking about is being kind to myself if I screw up here and there, and if I make my mistakes, and a growing tolerance for others' right to do the same.
Wow. Are you a perfectionist as a performer and a creator?
I was.
Is it a bad thing?
It's not helpful. Not a good thing.
Why not?
Because I think it's a driven thing to try and prove that you did it just right. And of course, you're always going to fall short and feel inadequate.
Yeah.
So once I figured this out through the therapy, I traded in perfectionism for, a striving for excellence, and that's okay. I think there's a huge difference between the two.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I like to hear you say that. You're kind of, you outgrew being a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Not everybody can.
I traded in for happiness, fulfillment.
Baby beluga whales. You have some personal connection with whales that led to the writing of that particular song.
Yeah, it was 1979 when I saw Kavna, that beautiful beluga in the Vancouver Public Aquarium. And Deb said, she said, you know, if you're going to write the song about the whales, because I was thinking of writing a beluga song, she said, make it about a baby whale. Children love babies, she said. Sure enough, that's where the title came from, Baby Beluga.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I didn't cast the song in the aquarium. I mean, the song liberated the whale. You swim so wild and you swim so free. You're just a little white whale on the go. Maybe that whale is all of us.
And it's a great anthem. I mean, kids sing it, and many of us feel what you're talking about. What other environmental issues have you become involved in?
Just about everything.
It is quite a large list.
From deforestation to acid rain. And I mean, I've supported a number of causes over the years, either through organizations that I've donated money to, or songs that I've written. The ecology album, Evergreen, Ever Blue, that I did in 1990, spoke to a number of these things. An anti-nuclear song on that album. Big Beautiful Planet song that talks about solar and wind power. I mean, just you name it. Essentially, the child part of me, that part that still has the wonder and curiosity intact, can't figure out why we can't live in a healthier way. I think we can. It's just a matter of will and the changes that we become determined to make.
And you take it very personally. You think you can do something about it.
I think I've been asked the making a difference question, you know, Leslie. And my feeling is that we make a difference every day because we're alive. We're eating and defecating every day. We're taking up space. It's not a question of can you make a difference? You do make a difference. And the way I put it is if you're conscious, you make the difference towards health. And I think it's about consciousness and it's about intent.
I gather that a lot of those feelings and those ideas have come certainly from your own experience, but also from books.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, talking about books, the books of Marion Woodman and Alice Miller have been very enlightening for me in terms of how we grow to be the adults that we are. And I think it's the emotional realm that's least understood in this society. And I think psychological well-being, certainly we can come to appreciate the importance of that. Because I mean, quite simply, I think that if the inner landscape, if there's peace on the inside, we're less likely to cause trouble on the outside, either malevolently or through our ignorance. We're less likely to be driven by the wrong things if there's peace on the inside. So very much for me, making peace with the earth, let's say, with nature, living in a respectful way, has to do with making peace with each other.
That makes good logical sense to me.
And that begins at home. It's got to happen here first.
Yeah. My guest today is Raffi. We're going to take a very short break and be back.
If you'd like more information about this program or any of the courses we offer at a distance, call us or visit our website. We welcome your comments.
You've been watching Off the Page. My guest today has been Raffi. Raffi, thanks a lot for coming on the show and taking us into your life.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks for watching. I'll see you again.